presently and live or watching it after the event, taking the time to bring this conversation into part of your life, and I think very much so as a parent, what it means for the future of the world we live in and the children we're raising and the aspirations we want. These things are deeply connected. We're going to take us on a bit of a journey, and I'm really stoked to have so many people listening today. But I'm also really excited to have two people who I very much admire, but also people that I consider my friends as well. So we've got Samantha Hiew with us and Marcia, Brissett-Bailey. And what I hope is not just a siloed conversation about feminism or workplaces or dyslexia or neurodiversity or shame and stigma, but rather that all those things and how they're connected into this conversation. There's no right or wrong on this, but what we feel in ourselves that makes this part of the justice that we're seeking here, and perhaps even the restorative justice of so many people who aren't able to share their stories because there are barriers attached to their learning differences. There are barriers attached to the celebrations of those differences. So that brings me to the month we're in as well, which is we're at Black History Month. It's October. Black History Month this month is about the title, which doesn't sit with me, but it's Saluting Sisters. I like the term celebrating more. I think celebration is there. Saluting, I guess, sounds a bit military to me, but that doesn't mean it has to be for you. But the idea that we are recognizing our sisters and in the struggle couldn't be more meaningful and timely. And I suppose I'm going to hand over the start of the questions to everyone, but I wanted to pause for a moment as a parent. And I have a tendency to think about things not just in an intersectional way, but also, I hope, when I'm struggling, in an intergenerational way. That it's not just something that I have to see in my lifetime, but rather whether I can be a good ancestor or a custodian for these struggles, to hold these struggles and make them better in my time, and then pass them on to others who will just make it better in their time. I need feminism to work, not because I'm a father of a daughter, but because I'm a father of a son. Because I have a son and I love him dearly, and I don't need him to just be complacent in the world where his power is, where his choices are. I need him to be part of something that takes on, as the custodian, as the new bridge builder, to say, yes, this matters to me. It doesn't matter if it's not happening to me, but it matters to me. That misogyny doesn't just hurt women, but it hurts men and their aspirations for themselves, and the kind of fathers and the kind of brothers and the kind of sons that they go on to be. So I don't know, really, I'm just sort of sharing that moment, if I may, and to think about the month we're in, Black History Month, and really kick this session off, really. And as I said, I'm really stoked to be in this moment with you all, and I'm really excited. I'm a big fan of both Sam and Marcia, and I don't know, it just feels exciting that knowing them both to have this platform now. So, and if I'm going to plug, because I know Marcia won't do it, so I'm going to do it. This is Marcia's book. If you haven't, what if I can get into it? There it is. It's called Black, Brilliant and Dyslexic. I don't know how to do this with a virtual thing, but we'll put a link to it anyway. But essentially, if you haven't seen it, I really recommend it. It's got a great set of chapters in there and a pretty awesome forward as well. That's by me. Anyway, listen, I'm going to start. And so I'm going to start with Marcia and Sam, if I can ask you to come off your mutes and start this conversation. So I don't mind who goes first, really, but I'm going to read the question out to people, and it is in the chat as well. But let's see. Intersectionality, as Ellie just said, began with Dr. Kimberle Crenshaw in the academic sphere as a concept for understanding our own identities and experiences of marginalization. How can we translate this into a concept into tangible actions? And so I would start that question to anyone who feels the urgency to take it.
Would you like to do it, Marcia? you're putting it to me,
But
intangible. I'm still kind of processing, but what I do know, you know, we have to recognize the historical content of this and the surrounding issues, but also like the systematic kind of discrimination and how deep inequalities and how this disadvantages from the offset of people. So how do we break that down? What does that look like? It's something that I still kind of live with and try to understand, because when I was diagnosed, and I'm going off a little bit and I hope it will come back together, but when I was diagnosed as dyslexic, the first three things I thought, okay, I'm Black, I'm a woman, and then I'm dyslexic. The two journeys already of being a Black woman, being told I have to work twice as hard was enough. And then being a woman, because I grew up in a matriarchal home. So it was a conflicting kind of thing of what society says women should be. But in my home, women were, we would say, running things. We were managing the home and they were doing leadership that I understood. But when I was outside the door, it wasn't. So how do we make these tangible? Because they conflict all the time, depending on what we call the norms or the norm, what's normality. But we're switching in and out, because one place will be one thing and one place another. So how do we make it tangible? I'm asking the question as I'm speaking to you. How do we break that down? What does that look like? It's really complex, and I'm
Yeah.
still struggling with. I guess, Sam, if you bounce in with me, maybe, because I'm really struggling. How do we really make that tangible? Because
Yeah.
there's a call for action for sure, and there's still people not feeling like they belong. But
Yeah.
how do we really make that tangible?
Yeah,
Do a
Marcia,
joint effort here. We can do a joint effort. Let me hear your thoughts, and then it can maybe bring me in to think.
I mean, I was agreeing with you with, the separation between how matriarchal your family is, and how things are run in terms of like who has the most power in the home. And for me, I was the same. Like I had a mother who was a homemaker and a father who was a serial entrepreneur. So he was always out, and my mom was in charge of 5 children, and I became one of the moms because I was the oldest child. And coming from a cross-cultural background in Malaysia, and having lived here half my life, I have always kind of found myself, not within the dominant culture and having to figure out how to fit in, but actually not really feeling like I should have to do that, because I came from a culture where I was one of the 3 main races, in the country. In Malaysia, I was Malaysian Chinese, and the Malaysian Malays were the natives, and then the Malay and the Indians. Whereas when I came here, I was one of the many others, I landed into a box that I didn't understand, because all of a sudden there wasn't even a box for me. And that became the norm in every single place I went to. And because of the way I look, I would enter the workplace and be expected to be very efficient, because as an Asian person, there's a certain stereotype that, is attached to us before we even have a chance to speak. And in some ways that stereotype might have helped, to get a certain job, but then the expectation around that is that you would not, complain if, anything doesn't, work or bode well with you. And so, yeah, I just realized that every workplace I went into, there's this invisible messages and rules and norms that I have to adhere to. And even if I did work harder than other people, the equality was never, ever apparent. And even when I did ask, I was still faced with pushback, which I couldn't understand, because to me, as a neurodivergent woman, I don't see myself as either masculine or feminine. I'm kind of both, and I don't see myself as like, yeah, I mean, I know obviously I'm a woman, but then I don't see myself as I need to appear or be judged as one.
Yeah.
And I think the workplace is such a long place to go in terms of creating that representation that allows people to feel that they belong, and that in the absence of that representation of someone like you, there's not going to be participation, right? And participation is what we want in order to have equality, you know, and equal contribution, you know. But before that can even happen, we have to feel safe, we have to feel like we matter, you know, and that, you know, is not there. And that is why we do the work that we do, right? And there's more conversation now, and we're able to open up this kind of conversations, but also from a position of being fairly privileged, you know, because we don't actually, you know, we're not employed by those organizations inside anymore. We're kind of the outsiders coming in, unable to say the things that people couldn't say, even though they feel it within, you know, and that comes with, yeah, we'd have to do it with such sensitivity and, you know, to really incite change.
I don't know if we've answered the question, but one of the things I will say from a cultural, and it can be complex, is that I've learned and I've had to unlearn things within the cultural perspective to not play it small. And it does come back to me sometimes, because even though you had that matriarchal kind of belief system within my family that, you know, as women, we would do a lot of things. You manage the home, you manage the money, you do all these different things. And that made me feel that great leadership. But when I went into the workplace, I went back to the role of that oppression kind of thing, because I had to follow the rules, but also my parents and my, you know, my ancestors said you've got a place where you just got to do what you're told. So then it conflicted with how you could show up. But I really love the fact you said about that masculinity and that femininity, because I see both too, because you have to be strong sometimes, you have to be perseverant, you have to be resilient. And is it a female? Is it? I couldn't tell you. So it's a really interesting thing that you're saying the same thing. And when I think of it, it's like, yeah, I never thought of it, but there was a norm of what a girl looked like. And that was what sometimes showed up in the workplace, that you can, you know, women do secretarial, you know, I'm talking because I'm a bit ancient like that. There were certain roles that you could do, but I couldn't see where I fit in because, like you said, but there's just an interesting bit. And I don't know if we, you know, the question's been answered, but this kind of intersectional bit. So when I first did my first degree, I did it in information science. So I was looking to go into security, data, firewalls, all of that kind of stuff. And I couldn't get a job. And what I feel is at play, which is really interesting, because there's two women on my course, myself and another lady, and she was she went into librarian because she was doing the course part-time because she was a librarian anyway, and she was going into management. So she went back to become a manager in a job. Me, on the other hand, couldn't get it, but a lot of my male colleagues were getting jobs. But I think there's some confusion. I've got this vision of me there with a lot of male white managers or people recruiting me, but they were confused. I disclosed that I was dyslexic. I'm a woman and I'm Black. I think there was a confusion, and I felt it, and I didn't get the job. So when we're talking about that femininity and those roles, I know that I didn't show up and I didn't fit in. And there was even wondering, how would I fit in? Does that make sense? So even where I'm thinking I've got the skills and the ability, how was I going to fit into that job? And I never got a job within the information world because I couldn't show up as myself. And I felt there was a confusion every time I went for that interview. So I was just kind of bringing that into that intersection, and that element of being a woman probably played up or showed up there, even though I wasn't necessarily seeing, but I started to feel it. And I started to feel the power and the labels. Does that make sense? Does that give some context?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, you both, and it's never given lightly or should be treated lightly. You've given some fairly strong, heartfelt stories about barriers that you faced as women, but you've dedicated your lives in the context of neurodiversity, inclusion, and learning differences, and learning powers, and learning exclusion. And I think, Marcia, you've touched on it there as well, about when you do share those differences, what happens? Does it? From my own experience, it's a similar way, I suppose. And I've always said, look, that if for whatever reason it is, and it could be racism or misogyny and ableism, but if you have to do more in a workplace to get further in it, you know, then you're probably hardwired to share less. You know? Protect yourself. You know? Yeah. Protect yourself to protect your well-being.
100%.
And I think you sort of both touched on it in the idea of representation. I felt that as well. That I never saw folks who looked like me with the courage to talk like me. And in truth, nor did I. You know, like whatever I do, I never did it in a workplace. You know, I had to go and create a workplace in order to tell a story, right? And I think you guys are the same. I think all three of us, we found a way to tell a story, and we found a way, I think, to heal and perhaps kill shame in different parts of that healing, because that's what this story can do. It can show up and it can represent, be we Black people, Malay people, or Bengali people, but we are making global representations just by showing up and telling a story and inviting someone who dare not say theirs to see familiarity.
I think that's what draws me in, is my passion, I think, because I moved into the education sector and I did see representation, and I did see representation with leadership, but boy, did I see the discrimination and the bullying and the feeling, the microaggressions. And I just felt leadership wasn't for me. And so much so, when a leadership role came up, I wasn't going to apply, but everyone said the job was for you. And I just thought, what I've seen my colleagues and my friends go through, would I want that for me? I want to protect myself. I actually ended up doing that role and applying, which a friend made me apply. She's going, you've got to apply for this job. This is you. And it was an interim job internally. I applied for it and it was fine, but it's all of the expectations and the representation not to let almost feel like someone down, because it's so much feeling of your shoulders that you've got to perform and work twice a night. And I did stay 7, 8 o'clock at night to make sure that I performed, and all of those things that you're having to carry because of those lived experience of feeling that you had to show up as a woman and being Black and then being neurodiverse. So you have to do 110%, and that was hard, not only on the mental health and on your well-being, shall I say, but just in every shape or form. I wasn't being my full and whole self, and that's really difficult to visualize and see myself there and remembering that experience to where I am now, even though I still have those experiences that come in sometimes. So I just thought that's just some of my kind of my thoughts on it, really, that it's evolving and people are still experiencing that. And we're talking about that psychological safe space. We're talking about it, but there's still something around that inequality piece and that piece of feeling people don't feel equal and people feel marginalized. And there are still roles where it's quite stereotypical, even though we're talking about the feminist side. So there's just so many layers to it. There's so many layers. I call it my shopping bags, and some of them I have to drop and not carry them anymore, because if I do, it'll make me very unwell, because you feel like you're having to carry for other people sometimes, and you just can't do that for your own well-being as well.
Mm-hmm. Right, I hear you. I hear. You can pause for a moment to sit with that. And I'm going to ask a question as well. Like, so when we think about Kimberle Crenshaw's work, and this was in 1988, so that's, you know, and okay, so it wasn't that long ago, but we did see, I think 2020 really pepper the word intersectionality, as Eddie had said. Well, I you know, as a buzzword, maybe.
Yeah.
But no, maybe the intention was really to do something with it. The more cynical side of me says, okay, but what are we doing with it? You know, because when we talk about, we have lots of women here, that's great, but we don't necessarily say which women. We don't talk about class. We don't necessarily talk about race. We don't necessarily talk about poverty or shame and such. And maybe that's not the workplace's role just yet to answer all those questions. But intersectionality does mean all those things. It does mean that they play a role, not just in the participation we're seeking, but also in the kind of civil society outside of work that we're building. What does inclusion look like? So I'm going to ask Sam to start with as well. If we were to put the work of Kimberle Crenshaw's work and the work of millions of other people, including the two of you, into this, what does a healthy feminist workplace look like for you?
There is so many layers to it, you know, like you say, Atif. I mean, I was thinking about so many things whilst you were both talking. And first of all, about, you know, making this workplace a psychologically safe place, you know, and we talked about intersectionality, but the very people who were consulted and maybe, contracted to, help change culture do not necessarily have, intersectional lens that they apply into their way of doing things. And when challenged, they will not even really know where to start, because the layers, as you mentioned, the diversity in our experiences is really not something you can comprehend if you never walked that experience, if you've never been in our body or been in the space in our circumstances. And for me, I have experienced the workplace from before I became a mother, when I was single, as a neurodivergent flying under the radar, having a few misadventures, too many, and then having children, postnatal depression, squiggly career, all of these different sections, and entering, my 40s, where I was then encountering challenges, with how my hormones, aren't what they used to be, and it having an impact on my undiagnosed ADHD at the time. And so at several different, stages of my life, I had wished for that, equality, or someone to say to me, yes, you can job share, yes, this job will be just right for you because it suits your brain. And yes, this will help you because you can do flexible working alongside raising your child, so you don't have to leave your daughter at home, which at the time was unthinkable because I had such severe postnatal anxiety that leaving her at home just felt like leaving her in the hands of wolves, and that was just how bad my anxiety was, without any family members here to look after her. So yeah, what an intersectional feminist workplace would look like would be one where we don't have to worry, when we encounter these challenges in our life, maybe, as you said, Atif, anticipatory, but how do you create anticipatory welcome when you're not consulting and trying to understand that your intersectionality isn't really about, helping a very small group of people in your workplace. It's about helping everyone, because, we come from different places, in society, and the workplace is made out of, diverse people, within like diverse life experiences. And so some of us, even if we're within the dominant culture, will encounter life stages and circumstance where you will become suddenly out of that dominant loop, whether it's like you became a parent and suddenly your time isn't your own anymore. Maybe you become ill, and the average age in which we acquire a physical disability is 55, right? And maybe your child, has some issues with health and you need to take time off, so anyone can get into that position of vulnerability at any point. And as you said, Atif and Marcia, to make a workplace intersectional is to make it relevant. And it is to, anticipate all these different types of histories or life circumstance that can land someone into a position of oppression, where they then can't bring their whole selves to work, because this impacts productivity and the bottom line, which, is what companies really care for. And she'll start from there.
Yeah, 100%. That oppression and power. And that's, my son said to me, Mum, school prepares you to be an employee, not a business owner. And why I'm saying that is that within the workplace, it should be initiative and creative, and it should be having all of these kind of thoughts about how that culture looks, what the ethos of the organization, what you want people to bring, but they have to feel safe. And it's not that, they have to do everything, but if you start from a place of inclusivity, if you start from a place of wanting to know and not being fearful of asking, the conversation about, race, for example, how do we make it inclusive but everyone feels safe? I always say you've got to be uncomfortable to be comfortable. You have to ask the questions. If your intention is that you want everyone to bring their whole self to work, what does that look like? And sometimes you have to invest. You can't just do it yourself, because HR doesn't know everything. You might have to bring somebody in to build you up and build from the roots and to your core leadership and directors, bring a medium. They should be able to talk what intersectionally really means and what does it mean for that workplace and how we're going to bring everyone together. So, yes, sorry.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But it touches on power a little, no?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Because I mean, I like whole self thinking, and I really love the conversations that it brings. But I also wondered, like, it's a word that comes up, bring your whole self to work. But perhaps a question I have for you in terms of thinking, in terms of women, is are women able to bring their whole self to work? Did you feel you could do that? Do you see a space where that can happen in the years ahead?
There's a pause.
I guess it's context dependent as well, right? It's who you are, where you come from, where your connections, and yeah, I suppose we don't all start from the same starting point. And if we did, then it would be great. But some of us maybe have more confidence earlier on, and some of us develop that confidence by not having to rely, on that workplace for our livelihood. So as a business owner, and you are your own kind of livelihood. So it's I guess in some ways we are quite privileged to be able to do that and say these things. But I remember when I was even contracting for a company that, if I said the things that I was saying now, I would lose the job, and lose the relationship, which comes in hand. And professional relationships are so tricky anyway for neurodivergents. And having, like a manager that kind of micromanages, this is another ball game. But yeah, it's so much harder when you're in employment. I definitely not.
And I think for me, as a and knowing as a Black woman the journey I've been on, I sometimes fall back of playing it small because you've been told to almost conform to just almost saying, just get on with it and just work as best as you can and show up. But there are complexities in that. And if I say too much, will I be seen as the aggressive Black woman? Or will I be seen as, somebody who is not somebody who you can work with because I use my hands a lot? And so there's so many other layers to that. And I know there are people fearful of saying something because how will that perceived? So then you kind of can be subservient in that. And then you're having those conversations yourself, knowing this is the right thing to do. Yeah. But how do I show up to say that? So you're right to ask that question. I have come better at it, but sometimes I do go within myself again because it feels safe there. Because sometimes I feel, does someone understand me? Or I feel misunderstood, or am I really explaining myself? And I'm having those direct conversations with myself if it makes real sense. And I think, like you said, Sam, there's so many other elements. Are you a carer? Are you all these things? Before, flexible working or having, working in a way that works with your family was just not heard of. I remember so many members of my colleagues crying, feeling, how am I going to do this? I've got to leave my child. Things have moved on, but you're right. It's so many layers to it, and there's so many intersections to how you do show up, and how many you can let go of, because you have to still protect yourself.
And Marcia, I love that you said that. Can I just add my experience in actually a recent contract before I went all out and focused on ADHD Girls. I actually did do the thing where I pushed back and I did kind of challenge whether a certain way was right or wrong, and I did ask for my seat at the table, and I asserted my position because I was essentially unmasking. But it was met with, and two of them were men actually, unfortunately, a man of from the dominant culture, and they were both younger than me and probably both shocked that I was, someone who could challenge them despite me being almost 10 or 15 years older and have so much more experience. But I was met with a hand that was trying to keep the lid on me. And that frustration that I felt was like nothing else, and the fact that they were both actually not very powerful in themselves, you know, because I see power, okay, you know, you come from privilege, yeah, that's power, but power also is if you feel power within yourself. And I feel that often people who do kind of put a lid on somebody, you know, who they think do not, you know, deserve to challenge them, they often don't have that sense of power inside. And a funny incident is that one of them would talk to me a certain way, but then after their boss, who really gets on with me, you know, kind of make them know that they really support me, that their boss supports me, then they come back with a change of tone. So I have kind of like had a change of treatment after that person who was showing me my microaggression realized that if he didn't do the right thing and treat me fairly, then his position, you know, his actions will be kept accountable.
Right.
So that was the only time I saw a change of treatment. It was when people knew that what they did, whether it was unfair, that would be found out.
So, but there is still, I guess, a sense of agency coming from, in this case, am I right in thinking it's another man?
Yeah, exactly. And I have encountered this in other ways where whilst I'm trying to help other neurodivergent women, I do unfortunately do say to them, look for an ally who's a man, because
Yeah. Okay. So that there's lots there. I mean, just that statement, look for an ally who's a man. I mean, you know, it's heartbreaking to think that that is said at all. And I'm again putting on this intergenerational responsibility on or role. That it'd be heartbreaking that my daughter, these are words that I'd have to say, or her mother would say to her in the workplace, knowing she's just, you know, 9 years old, that things won't change. You know, this is. And then I'm thinking about, Marcia, what you'd said, you know, the idea there's a phenomenon called the angry Black woman in the workplace. I mean, to feel that for an audience, to think it's that that there's a phenomenon in your world, to say that exists in workplaces and everyone's got one almost as if, and you don't want to be that one. This is powerful. And it has to be said, because when we're building these inclusive worlds and we're righting wrongs and building social justice, who do we leave behind? You know, and who leads from the front? Does feminism speak in a Eurocentric world? Does it speak in the voice and agency of people outside of Europe? Does it speak to Malay women or Black women? It's not. It's something that we have to ask these questions for participation to be made real, right? And so that we don't say to a children's future, look for a man to be an ally, or don't be the angry Black woman, because it's okay to be the angry Black woman. There's a world designing itself, perhaps not to fix this quick enough. So I'm going to ask you, Marcia, a few questions as well. And I'm conscious of time, but I want to keep sort of this, the sense of you, both of you, is exactly how I knew you would be, that it would be truthful and urgent, and to an audience deeply relevant. Marcia, you spent your career sharing lived experiences. We know that this is challenging. We know that this is difficult, but I guess what motivates you to do it?
It's a lot of things, but it truly is that kind of point in my life when I just said I decided that I cannot be masking this working twice as hard that was instilled in me. And what I know now was that was because of the color of my skin. And I just thought, that just can't be right. But I know there's so many women like me suffering in silence. And then I just said, I cannot do that. I cannot be quiet anymore. So I just started to continue to share my story. And in that way, it enables other people to find their voice. It's not always been easy, but it becomes easier. And I had to learn to feel the fear and do it anyway, because what did I have to lose? Because I'm being me, and it's my story, and no one can take that away from me. It's the truth. You know, when I felt invisible, it was the truth. All the other concepts of how I got there and why I was feeling like that, and the support mechanisms I could have used, but that was fear, because what Sam was saying about the workplace and all of those things, it's funny because that's how it feels at school, that control of somebody controlling, and you're not able to speak or show up. And it's interesting how Sam, and it's almost like sometimes I find that the school system, it moves into the workplace and people don't know how, is that control and power again fall into play. So for me, I just didn't want to no longer feel helpless and no longer feel invisible, like I didn't have a voice or I didn't count. As I say, my grandmother never grew me up like that. My grandma never grew me up like that. She said work twice as hard. What I learned, I think the key thing is to be able to be vulnerable and be kind to myself. I didn't understand that because I was always having to show up and be strong.
Yeah, beautifully.
And
You
I
really,
didn't know about being vulnerable and being myself, you know, that I had those feelings because I just had to always show up and be resilient. But that also went along with being a Black woman. Why do I always have to be resilient? Why do I always have to take the pain and of other people inflicting things on me because they felt I was whatever they felt? So that's part of the story of why I just had to do this for me. It's almost like therapy in a way. I had to do the inner child work. I had to learn to accept me because I was told I was never good enough. So that's really where the passion came from and the desire, because I was told I wasn't good enough. And that was the breaking point for me because I ever thought that cannot be me.
No.
That cannot be me. I've come from runes. I've come from ancestors who have fought, women who have played their role, my ancestors. How can I allow that to be me? I'm not going to play small anymore, even though that's the thing culturally. We were playing it small because we've come from an oppressive state of slavery, etc. So there are still those elements of colonization, which are still in elements of my family roots. And I just didn't want that anymore for me. And like you, I have children. I have a son and I have a daughter. And yes, there are times I feel as having a son, I fear for him being on the bus. That's the truth. So as a Black woman, that is a fear of mine. But equally as having a daughter, I also want her to feel safe and feel she can show up for herself. I both want them to. And that's the legacy. I want them to feel empowered to be able to speak and say how they feel and be able to show up and do what they want to do and have their passion and desire to be purposeful in that without the barriers.
No. There's such grace in your words and your grandmother's too, may I add.
Thank you.
Absolutely. It reminded me, if you haven't heard it, or maybe someone will put it in the chat, but Mos Def did a song called Umi Says, and it was about his grandmother saying, shine your light on the world, shine your light for the world to see, my Umi Says. Anyway, you really reminded me of that, and thank you for that. Sam, I suppose it's similar to you, like, you know, in the context of that you are representing so much in a global majority of a voice that we don't hear enough from. I suppose all three of us do in our own ways.
Yeah.
You know, you're focusing on women and in particularly about fostering intersectional inclusion around neurodiversity for women. You know, what motivates you for that urgency in particular?
Yeah, well, Atif, I think you don't really fully understand the system until you work to change it. And for me, I haven't been able to really fit in for a really long time, 16 different industries and multiple different sectors and careers, and becoming a mother, crossing countries. I just realized that in the end, I had to create my own place, to kind of thrive in it, and going back into the workplace and seeing the things that I wish had happened, and trying to change things so that, like you say, our children don't have to go through the same thing. And it starts from even the way I talk about neurodiversity and neurodivergence, reframing it in a way that includes our life context. And it's not just strictly from a medical deficit model that's been perpetuated when we didn't really know better. So it starts from that, because it's not about looking at the superpower, it's about looking at the consequences, of how our lives, the lives that we had impact how we show up as neurodivergent, and not just neurodivergent, it's intersectional neurodivergent. Because I don't really want, the next generation of my own children to have to face the barriers that I face, because I'm trying to, not in a big-headed way, but, trying to very microscopically prepare every step, that they're going to walk through, prepare it for them. I mean, whilst advocating all the time in their schools, and the people they encounter. So for me, it's really about, understanding what happened to us and trying to open other people's eyes to this as well, so that we can, create environments that everyone can thrive. I just can't stand inequality anyway. I didn't necessarily grow up with very strong female role models. I mean, I had a very strong mom, but wasn't like in a way that Marcia had. Like, I was more the oppositional kind, like the demand avoidance kind, where I just, had to, from a very young age, learn how to cope, because I was surrounded by a lot of negativity. And in order to survive, I had to think about a way out, all the time, and think about solutions, think about positive thinking, and think about how we can make the world better for people. And I don't think I've fully gotten over it, until I was diagnosed. And then part of the answers, started coming to me. But as you know, Atif, we were talking about this, the representation just wasn't there in neurodiversity when we were talking about, neurodiversity, especially in the main room, because we know, the educational attainment, that was the majority of what people were talking about, and the learning and thinking differences. But what about the impact of the life you've had on being an intersectional neurodivergent, which was much bigger than any of those things, that form the challenges that neurodivergence, had. So that's why I wanted people to know about this. And it still feels like I'm walking on eggshells sometimes, because the topic that I'm going in for, because I get asked to do a neurodiversity awareness session, and I refuse to do anything without also adding the intersectional lens. And that means I've got to talk that much faster and add more context, sometimes in the hope that no one's going to, rebel against it, because it might not be what that room wants to hear. But it gets in
Sam,
anyway.
you've got to do your truth. You've got to be your truth, and that's the truth, isn't it?
Yeah, I do, but it is really unnerving. And I think that I go in with this like squishy ball, and I kind of like, squeeze the life out of it, and, just go and deliver and try and make it relevant for them also, because people will only really be interested and take action if it affects them as well. That's just human nature.
So can I just add one thing? One of the other things what drives me as well, I no longer want people to be imposters. I had that imposter syndrome, which was drawn on me from my childhood, but I'm not the imposter, and neither is anybody else. It's a system by design that's the imposter. And so that also drives me as well, so we can believe in ourselves.
Yeah, that's pretty strong.
Yeah, it's very moving. I mean, I know that I know you both well, and I've had shared many courageous conversations with you separately. But just for me, just to be in this space, and I think for people listening as well, there's so much richness in the stories that women don't tell, right? And wisdom. And I'm just sort of trying to sort of keep to the space where I'm thinking as well for myself. Look, one of the challenges, and I've sort of said it before and what touched on in this conversation, that we are often playing to the fragility of the room, the power in the room, what the power is paying us to say, or in most cases, actually not paying us at all. But and then the terms in which we say it. And I think, Sam, I might have said this when we first get to know each other, that when we do experience these things, we'll bleed a little bit, because we'll go to our childhoods, and then we'll bleed some more, and then we'll find that we're on the train bleeding a little bit more. And somewhere along the line, you are trying to figure out is, why do we do it? And I think you both, and the spirit of time, you both have capitalized that really well, about an intergenerational conversation. And I think that is our work, because it's not just intergenerational, it's not just intersectional, but without it, it is not relevant. If we don't have an intersectional understanding of barriers that people face, then we won't have a relevant understanding of the barriers. What we will have is a continuation of calendar optics that play to diversity calendars, and playing, I think, to the fragility of a room that's prepared to talk only on particular terms. But it is hard work, and we are here to do it. And we're going to dig deep, and we, as I said, we might bleed a little bit, but we're here, right? We're here. So I guess I'm asking really to both of you, given the challenges you've shared and the things that you've thought about, and the hopes you've got for your children and all our children, really, what is it that keeps you hopeful in this work? You know, what keeps you hopeful for intersection, maybe feminism, but just intersectionality itself, being true to its spirit and true to Kimberle Crenshaw's own words in 1988? What keeps you hopeful? I'm going to ask you, Marcia, first.
Okay, so I do this backwards. It's like continuous learning. We can never stop learning. It's almost like if we stop, we've come to the end. So it's like it continues. I'm not saying that it's not going to just stop like that, because it's so embedded, it's so deep. So we have to continue, and it's just part of the journey of where we are at this point in our lives, but also in the point of in society. So for me, it's like a journey. I'm going to keep continuing, and to try to make some change and some differences and empower people along the way to empower themselves to be part of that change. But it's like a continuous thing. You know, we talk about lifelong learning. I would like to, maybe not in my lifetime, but I'd like to think that we come to some kind of understanding, and we meet in the middle to accept what has happened and accept there's been inequalities, and it's deep and it's complex, it's hurtful, but we go there together and work together to find a happy medium, to feel equality in a different way. Something is around that kind of feeling that I have, and it's deep within me, because as I said, I don't want that imposter to feel that you cannot do something because you're a woman, or you cannot do something because you're Black, or because you're dyslexic. I don't want that to be the norm, or, you know, that can't be the norm.
Thank you, Marcia. Thank you. I feel that deep in my chest. I'm sure many do. Sam, for you too as well, what keeps you hopeful?
Yeah, well, Atif, what keeps me hopeful is that, was it 2 years ago, we were talking about intersectionality being talked about more, hopefully, in neurodiversity and neuro-inclusion, and look where we are now. You know, and I think, like, as neurodivergents, you know, with this futuristic outlook on things, we're always, you know, maybe able to look into the future before other people would do. And I think that the change had happened quicker than we thought, maybe, just because, remember, no one was really talking about intersectionality alongside neurodiversity. But then in the last conference that we were both at, and Marcia was at as well, like, there were more talk about intersectionality in the words of someone who was speaking, bless him, a gold mine, you know? And I was like, well, yes, it is a gold mine to you, but it is our reality. And it is good that you're recognizing it, but maybe choose a different word. But yeah, there is that realization now, you know, that it isn't relevant unless you're intersectional. And what keeps me hopeful is that we're all looking for answers. And in some ways, we're going to realize that the only way in this is to unite and notice that everything is interconnected. And what affects me affects you as well, in one way or another. We're all karmic creatures, right? So that keeps me hopeful, but also very idealistic, maybe not very with the times, but that's how I am.
If we weren't idealists, I'm not sure we'd be here, right?
Yeah.
You know? So absolutely.
I love the real talk, Sam. She gave a little bit of a nugget there, some real talk there.
Yeah. That's the only way, Marcia.
Brilliant. Well, look, this brings us to a close for this session. I'm going to hand over to Ellie in a moment, but I just want to thank you both for the generosity of your spirits, the kindness in your hearts, not just to share your stories, but to make it easier, as we've said, for a group of kids, perhaps not even born yet, that will look back at these moments and look at the courage that we had to tell this story, to kill shame and do a little healing, and take some people with us. I'm going to try and do this again, but this is Marcia's book. I can't make this work. There it is. But I'm going to play it. Or
I don't think I can make it work as well, actually.
Your face,
We have to get off the off-screen thing.
Unplug it, and then we'll put a chat.
Thank you.
We send this out, and I'm going to say thank you to both of you for being here, and for Ellie for hosting this space. I'm going to hand over to Ellie, and to the audience. Thank you so much from me.
Brilliant. Thank you all so much. So a special thank you to Atif, Marcia and Sam for this conversation, but also to everyone that contributed in the chat as well. I want to highlight one thing from Sam and one from Marcia that I think highlights in combination what we're trying to do with the series here. As Sam said, intersectionality may be a goldmine, but it's our reality. And I think adding in Marcia's message of start from a place of wanting to know, everyone that's joined us today is doing that. So we really do want to sincerely thank you for that. Our next panel is on the 21st of November. We're going to be taking a real practical approach to a real tangible barrier that's faced by organisations with our session, which is called An Intersectional Inclusive Welcome, Integrating EDI into Recruitment. We already have 2 guest panelists confirmed that. It's going to be Perry Timms, who is the founder and CEO of PTHR, and Tahira Yassin, who is a neurodiversity advocate and founder of the Neuro Directory. So make sure to join us for that, for another valuable investigation on the realities of intersectionality. Also, if you want to delve deeper into the conversations of today, remember that DNA provide training and consultancy packages for organisations of all sizes. So whether you're looking to embed inclusion in your recruitment processes or expand your team's confidence in intersectionality, let's talk. Thank you again to everyone who joined us.